Most lenses are forgotten the moment the next one arrives, reviewed, ranked, replaced, and gone. But every once in a while, a lens escapes that cycle and becomes something closer to a myth. This is not a buying guide. This is about the 5 lenses that conquered history. Welcome to Alt Buzz Lenses. Hit subscribe. Because what's coming at number 1 will change the way you think about glass forever. At number 5, we have the Helios 44 258mm f2. And before you raise an eyebrow, yes, a Soviet-era lens is opening this list, and it belongs here more than almost anything else we could have chosen. Because the Helios teaches you something in the first 5 minutes of using it that most photographers spend years trying to learn. That perfection and character are not the same thing. This lens was never meant to be a legend. It was manufactured in mass quantities in the Soviet Union, built to be affordable and functional, designed with no ambition beyond basic optical utility. It was a working lens for working people. What most people don't realize is that the Helios 44-2 was actually a direct optical clone of the Carl Zeiss Biotar 58mm f2. A West German design that Soviet engineers reverse engineered after World War II using captured blueprints and factory equipment. So in a strange twist of history, one of the most beloved cult lenses ever made began life as an act of industrial replication. It was produced across multiple factories, KMZ, MMZ, and others, which means no 2 copies are quite identical. And collectors today actively seek out specific factory markings because they produce subtly different rendering characteristics. And then something strange happened with all of that mass production. Photographers started noticing what the Helios did in the background of an image, that unmistakable, almost hallucinatory swirl that modern optics have never been able to authentically replicate. The bokeh doesn't just blur the background, it pulls it into a spiral, like the image itself is breathing, like the out-of-focus world is dancing around your subject. This swirling quality comes directly from the lens's curved field and specific aberration profile, characteristics that a modern optical engineer would correct without hesitation, but which the Helios carries as a permanent, indelible signature. And here's the thing that makes the Helios genuinely legendary rather than just interesting. It became a cult classic not through marketing, not through influencer campaigns, not through heritage branding or a 5-figure price tag. It became a legend because hundreds of thousands of photographers picked it up, shot with it, and felt something they could not explain. You can still find a clean copy today for under $100, and it will produce images that lenses costing 50 times more simply cannot. In 2026, when modern lenses are rendering with almost clinical precision, the Helios still exists in a category that no algorithm has been able to manufacture. It proved and keeps proving that sometimes the flaw is the feature. Sometimes the imperfection is the entire point. At number 4, we have the Canon EF 50mm f1.0 LU USM. Say that aperture out loud for a moment. f1.0. In the world of autofocus lenses, in the context of the 1980s and 1990s when this lens was conceived and built, that number was not just impressive, it was borderline irresponsible. It was Canon essentially saying, we don't care how difficult this is. We are going to build a 50mm autofocus lens that opens to f1.0, put it on the EF mount, and show the entire industry what this system is capable of. The story behind this lens is really a story about ambition without apology. When Canon launched the EF mount in 1987, they needed to demonstrate that the mount's wider throat diameter wasn't just an engineering decision, it was a philosophical one. The EF 50mm f1.0 was the proof of concept made physical. Here's a detail that puts the engineering challenge into perspective. At f1.0, the depth of field on a 50mm lens focused at 1 meter is roughly 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters. That means the autofocus system had to land within a margin that most photographers can barely perceive with their own eyes. The lens weighed 985 grams, and Canon produced it from 1989 until quietly discontinuing it in 2000, with only around 3,600 units ever made. And the images it produced, that shallow, almost liquid depth of field, that rendering quality at maximum aperture that no other autofocus lens of its era could touch, those became the visual language of a certain kind of ambition. Today, finding one in good condition is a hunt. Prices on the used market regularly climb past $3,000 for a clean copy, and they keep climbing. It was never the sharpest lens at f1.0. It was never the most convenient to work with. But none of that matters when you understand what it actually was. It was not a practical tool. It was a statement. And in 2026, that statement still echoes. If you're watching this and finding yourself genuinely surprised by how deep this lens history goes, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses right now so you don't miss a single video. And drop a comment below telling me which lens you thought would make this list before we even get to number 1. I read every single one. Let's talk. At number 3, we have the Nikon Noct-Nikkor 58mm f1.2. Most fast lenses become legendary for what they can see. The Noct became legendary for what it refused to tolerate. And that distinction matters enormously because it tells you something about the kind of engineering intelligence that went into this glass. The problem the Noct was designed to solve has a name that sounds almost poetic for a technical flaw: sagittal coma flare. At maximum aperture, especially in night scenes, most fast lenses of the era would render point light sources: street lamps, candles, stars, neon signs, not as clean circles, but as comet-like streaks, asymmetric and distracting. Night photographers knew this problem intimately. It was one of those compromises you simply accepted when you shot in the dark with fast glass. Nikon decided not to accept it. The Noct-Nikkor 58mm f1.2 was built from the ground up to eliminate sagittal coma flare at maximum aperture. The aspherical front element, hand ground, because CNC technology wasn't yet capable of the tolerances Nikon required, was the precise engineering solution to an optical problem most manufacturers were content to ignore. Here's what makes that hand-grinding detail remarkable. Each aspherical element reportedly took skilled Nikon technicians close to an hour to grind and polish to the required specification. No automation, no shortcut. Every single copy demanded that same hour of human precision before leaving the factory. Nikon produced the original AI Noct-Nikkor from 1977 through 2005, nearly 3 decades, which speaks to how completely it owned its niche. And that niche was not convenience or versatility. It was one very specific thing: making city lights look like jewels at night, wide open with no compromise. Nikon later revisited the concept with the AFS 58mm f1.4G in 2013, a modern lens explicitly built with the same coma correction philosophy, which tells you everything about how deeply the original's legacy still lived inside Nikon's own engineering culture. That intentionality is what separates the Noct from being simply a very fast lens. Almost any manufacturer can build a fast lens if they're willing to compromise somewhere. The Noct refused to compromise on the specific problem that matters most when you're shooting at night wide open: the quality of light itself. In 2026, when we talk about lenses built with a singular engineering vision rather than a checklist of acceptable trade-offs, the Noct-Nikkor is the reference. It became legendary not because it was the fastest or the most glamorous, but because someone at Nikon asked a very specific question, and then built the very specific answer. We are halfway through this list, and it keeps getting bigger. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. Hit subscribe. And like this video if you've ever shot with any of these lenses, or if you've ever dreamed about it. Because what's coming next makes everything before it feel like a warm-up. At number 2, we have the Leica Noctilux 50mm line. Notice I said line, not lens, because the Noctilux is not a single product. It is a name with 60 years of generational prestige built into every syllable. To say Noctilux is to invoke an entire philosophy of photography, one built around low light, visual drama, and a kind of optical freedom that no other manufacturer has ever quite managed to replicate. The story begins in 1966 when Leica released the first Noctilux, a 50mm lens opening to f1.2, featuring one of the first aspherical elements ever used in a production camera lens. Fewer than 1,750 units of that original version were ever made, which places it among the rarest Leica lenses in existence. When the f1.0 version arrived in 1976, it ran for over 3 decades and became the lens that defined an era of M-mount low-light photography. Then in 2008, Leica released the f0.95 ASPH, a completely redesigned formula that somehow felt even more mythological than everything before it. The current f0.95 retails for around $13,000, and there is almost always a waiting list. Shooting with a Noctilux wide open is an experience genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has never done it. The depth of field is so shallow that it feels more like a decision about what to exclude than what to include. The rendering has a quality, a glow, a presence, a way of separating subject from scene that photographers have spent years trying to replicate with digital processing and have never fully succeeded. Street photographers in particular have built entire visual identities around the Noctilux look. That way it renders a face in a crowd, sharp and present against a background that dissolves into pure atmosphere. But here's what truly makes the Noctilux legendary, rather than just expensive. It became an identity. Owning one was never purely about the images it made. It was about belonging to a lineage, a conversation between photographers that stretched back 60 years and still had no conclusion. In 2026, when every smartphone promises beautiful images in near darkness, the Noctilux still carries something no algorithm can simulate: the weight of desire, the mythology of choice, the feeling that the person behind the viewfinder made a commitment. Legend is not always about engineering. Sometimes it is about what a tool makes you feel about yourself as a photographer, and no lens in history has done that more powerfully or more enduringly than the Noctilux. Before we get to number 1, subscribe if you haven't already and turn notifications on, because this channel is only going to go deeper from here. Don't leave. Number 1 is the entire reason this video exists. At number 1, we have the Zeiss Planar 50mm f0.7. Let that aperture sit for a moment. f0.7, not f1.4, not f1.0, f0.7. There are photographers with decades of experience who have never seen this lens in person. There are optical engineers who treat it as a theoretical reference point, the place where the laws of physics begin to feel like negotiating partners rather than hard limits. The origin of this lens does not begin in a photography studio or a product development meeting. It begins with NASA. In the late 1960s, Zeiss was contracted to produce lenses for the American space program. Glass fast enough to capture imagery in conditions where almost no light existed. They built 18 of them. 18. That number is not a misprint. The entire production run of the Zeiss Planar 50mm f0.7 was 18 lenses. 10 went to NASA. The remaining units found their way into other hands, and one set of those hands belonged to Stanley Kubrick. It is worth pausing on that number. 18 lenses. Fewer than the number of players on a football pitch. And yet, those 18 pieces of glass permanently changed the visual language of cinema. Kubrick used a modified set of these lenses to film entire scenes of Barry Lyndon using only the light of actual candles. No lighting rigs, no reflectors, no fill. Just candlelight and the Zeiss Planar. The lens's f0.7 aperture gave it a light-gathering capability approximately 10 times greater than a standard 50mm f1.4 lens. 10 times. That is not a marginal improvement. That is a different category of optical instrument entirely. The result was imagery that had never existed before in cinema and has never been fully replicated since. A visual texture so rich, so painterly, so impossibly luminous in near-total darkness that film scholars still analyze those sequences 50 years later. When you watch those candlelit interiors, scenes that feel like Vermeer paintings somehow caught on moving film, you are watching what happens when a lens designed for outer space gets used to explore the most intimate corners of the human story. In 2026, the Zeiss Planar 50mm f/0.7 exists in a category with no comparison. It is not vintage. It is not rare in the way discontinued products are rare. It is mythological. Most surviving lenses are held in museums, private collections, or institutional archives. Zeiss itself maintains one as a permanent artifact of the company's optical heritage. Prices, when they occasionally surface, are reported as news rather than listings. Figures discussed in collector circles run well into six figures, though verified sales remain nearly impossible to confirm because the lens almost never moves. But the legacy of this lens is not measured in currency. It is measured in the fact that every conversation about what glass can theoretically achieve eventually arrives at this number, f/0.7, and at the 18 pieces of glass that proved it was not theoretical at all. It was real. It was holdable. It was pointable at a candle in a dark room, and the image it made is still being studied today. The Zeiss Planar is the moment this list stops being about great lenses and becomes something else entirely. It is the moment when optics became history. 5 lenses, 5 different reasons why legend outlives specification. The Helios taught us that character is discovered, not purchased. The Canon taught us that ambition leaves a permanent mark. The Noct taught us that solving one thing with total conviction is its own kind of genius. The Noctilux taught us that desire is its own kind of optics, and the Zeiss reminded us that sometimes someone crosses a boundary the rest of the world thought was permanent, and the image they made on the other side is still being studied today. This is Alt Buzz Lenses. We'll see you in the next one.